Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. So the last video cut abruptly, and I'm sorry about that. I looked up pretty quickly. I noticed it pretty readily, which is good. Um, I noticed that it said like recording stopped. It didn't power off or anything. It just had like a circle on the front of it. So I took a look at the message and it said that the SD card wasn't fast enough, but that doesn't make any sense because we've been doing this for a while. So we're gonna see if this works. We also moved our spot up closer to the lakefront. And Winchester is really hot, so I moved us right up against a rock face. Hopefully there's no rattlesnakes that come out. Um, it's something I was looking out for. That's why I didn't want to do it, but he was really getting hot. I had to walk back up the hill to my campsite to get more batteries for the GoPro to do this next episode, and just to walk in this like blazing 6,000 foot altitude heat. Um, Something else I've been thinking about is the Zia. The Zia is the symbol. Uh, Either has three or four stripes in north, up, down, left, right, or north, south, east, west. Um, it's really similar to the Inca cross, but I got a glimpse of the sun and it created like a flare in my eye for a second, and I was like, oh, I get why they make that symbol. Like certain perceptions of the sun look like the Zia symbol. Um, I also met some other campers across uh, in the lots next to me. They're in RVs or travel trailers, but they're using like generators and solar panels because this section doesn't have electric. You can still pull an RV into it. Anyway, so we're still at Rihanna Abiku Lake. I've been hearing it pronounced Abiku, not Abikuyu. Um, it's interesting too how the first I, a B Q is emphasized when there's not the extra vowels at the end, but when there's the extra vowels, it's like Abikuyu. You emphasize the U instead. So that's why you have diachronic marks and accent marks. Um, I think those are called diachronic marks. Um, I wanted to set my chair up in a way too that allowed me to like look kind of more at the lake a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can do that and try to stay in the frame a bit. But it's beautiful. It's like this teal right now, or like a not aquamarine, but like almost want to call it like sea prism. Um, it's definitely like turquoise. It's like deep and matte. It's one of my favorite colors. We were in the middle of the chapter on matrices. Matrix, something for thought, a context for thought. We had about through 4 pages left in that chapter. We probably will only get through. I think it's likely that we'll have two more episodes. Well, this one and one more for part two. Okay. So we had just gone over the part about Wittgenstein. If a lion could talk, we could not understand him. There is a context underlying a strange people's observable actions that is inaccessible to someone from outside that field. Could we understand the context of a lion's field of meaning? Wittgenstein does not think so. He's significantly cooler in the shade. That sun is crazy, you guys. That's why it dropped so much. Uh, at night it dropped in. It was like 45 this morning, 51, and it's probably 70 something, maybe 80. It's a high of 76 today. And it says it's high of 77, says it's 67. It says it feels like 66. I don't think that's true. Um, so the UV index is 7 right now, and it was 0 earlier, and it'll cool off in a few hours. Um, I will almost, yeah, I will definitely go do some other things before recording the third episode for this one. So, let me set a timer, another timer. All right. Could we understand the context of a line's field of meaning? Wittgenstein does not think so. The lack of shared context, of shared matrix, leads to the notion of incommensurability, which is attacked from time to time by those who are threatened by the idea that there might be different explanations for similar phenomena. Anyone, however, who is fluent in 2 or more languages knows that there are some nuances in each language that cannot be translated. Jokes are an example. An attempt to understand the matrix of another society is complicated by the fact that we try to fit the strange ideas of a quote strange people into our own frame of reference without realizing that no such fit exists. Also, I'm like 3 feet away, 2 feet away, 2 to 3 feet away from a cliff. The no such fit exists. Another complication is an attempt to bring to the other concepts from within our own context. In the first case, we see the other's actions and say, that is just like this. In the second case, we set out to see what the other thinks about a specific concept from within our own cultural context. In both cases, one looks for similarities and ends by ignoring crucial differences that, despite apparent similarity, ensure continued lack of communication. A society that has power over another is not in a possession to understand the matrix of the society over which it exercises power. The less powerful society's matrix, however, is constantly under attack. Through this attack, both matrices are exposed. 2 frames of reference in the same place will be competitors for, quote, truth and, quote, validity, as witness the former Yugoslavia, where Roman Catholic, Orthodox Catholic, and Muslim are inhabiting the same area. The conflict between America's indigenous peoples and the European colonial is another example. Early in the contact between the 2 peoples, there was an attempt on the part of the colonial to coexist. This was followed by an attempt to exterminate the other, then the incarceration of the other in bounded locations, and finally the turning over of the indigenous to the religious missionaries. The attempt to convert the other to one's own matrix, regardless of how well intended or peaceable, is extermination by other means. The existence of differing matrices among unlike people need not be a source of conflict. There are cultures that assume that the member of another culture will operate under a different matrix. This difference can be defined as a natural occurrence among the species. An absolute sense of truth then gives way to a sense of relative truth. The problem comes in when a culture has a sense only of absolute truth. All cultural groups not sharing the sense of truth with this group will be seen as existing in error, or as Wittgenstein puts it, quote, where 2 principles really do meet, which cannot be reconciled with one another, then each man declares the other a fool and a heretic. That is, there's a typo there. It's missing the end quotation marks. but I don't think I have a pen on me, so I'm not going to mark it. Among North American indigenous groups, there existed a shared assumption that the group, unlike one's own, would have a different truth based on experiences and locations unique to the other. So they enter encounters assuming that they'll have to explain their context. It is this notion of the assumed difference of the other that allowed the early European colonists to survive in countries unlike their own. The indigenous people, upon first encounter with the European, are portrayed as helpful and generous. It is only when the indigenous peoples discover that the European does not share his sense of land and occupation that the troubles begin. The linguist Benjamin Whorf claims that differences in language reflect differences in matrices, and both arise from the fact that different peoples focus on different aspects of the universe as most important. Peoples, according to Whorf, segment the universe in different fashions. Their languages reflect this focus. Unlike Whorf, however, I do not think that the difference is a matter of language. A child, before the acquisition of language, is already exposed to a quote worldview that he will come to share as a sense of reality with the other members of the group. The child may, as Wittgenstein states it, learn the rules purely practically without learning any explicit rules. The child learns a way of being in the world. The problem of discovering the matrix of understanding is a bit more complex than merely learning it in the course of infancy and childhood. I was made aware of the existence of different matrices in my own home. My father had one set of explanations and attitudes. My mother, Hispanic and Catholic, another. Outside of my own home, there is another matrix. My father does not say that one is right and another wrong. There is no charge here of fool or heretic. There is simply a method of doing that is ours and theirs. For the sake of survival, I learned from my father that it is necessary not only to know the different ways of being, but to know where they are appropriate. I gather also that I am free to select my own actions in the face of different ways of being. Where there is no awareness of competing matrices, there is no awareness of the possibility of differing, equally valid ways of being. So Lugonis will talk about the leman. The leman is the way in which we can remember our different selves in different worlds and different interactions with different people. And we can try to use those as tools or as, uh, we can say, degrees of freedom or means of escape from domination, means of resistance, um, by being different in new worlds, by being, you know, we we're not we don't have to be constructed by the world that we're currently in if we can remember that we exist in different ways in other worlds. Um, so yeah, I was thinking about that in relation to for the sake of survival, I learned from my father that it is necessary not only to know the different ways of being, but to know where they are appropriate. I gather also that I am free to select my own actions in the face of different ways of being. I'm reminded of William James's pragmatism too, where pragmatism is the ability to cohere different experiences with different truths, where truth is the adaptation of the person or the human, the adaptation of the creature, um, with a system of language in relation to a world. And there's is that tendency to categorize, objectify, control, and administrate, bureaucratize. Um, what should be a moving, and she talks about this, the difference between moving. She does discuss what it means to try to create stability in an unstable motion, which is different from trying to control administrations of whatever labors you insist others do. And it's bound up with her view on not asking others to do things or not commanding. No person has the right to command another person. So, where there is no awareness of competing matrices, there is no awareness of the possibility of differing, equally valid ways of being, or of resistance. If I, as my father's child, act differently from my schoolmates, I am labeled weird or stupid by those children. But even though there is no reinforcement of my way of being in the classroom, I have a refuge in my own home. It was not for nothing that indigenous children were taken away from their parents and placed in boarding schools. Where there is no reinforcement of a competing paradigm, it cannot continue to exist. In most cases of the boarding school experience, children were forbidden to room with children of their own tribe. The reason given for this action was to promote assimilation into the mainstream. In actuality, it was to eradicate a way of being. Rapid assimilation did not necessarily follow. Suicide rates were high in boarding schools, and the attempt to replace one tradition with another too often led to an individual who did not know either. Understanding the existence of two matrices in the experience of the indigenous person was a crucial component to growing up with any sense of identity at all. The child learns early that there are different expectations of his actions from within each group. The home group emphasizes the sense of the individual as a part of the whole. The European emphasizes the individual. My cousins and I in the classroom would have preferred to accomplish a task together. The teacher demands that each work in isolation. The teacher is authoritarian. The native child's home life instills the value of self-directed behavior. So people in authoritarian structures can't usually struggle to self-direct their behavior from what I've seen in highly structured and highly regimented systems. Um, when with a lack of when faced with a lack of orders because their authority is unable to tell them what they should do, they have no sense of, and this, I think Kant talks about this in enlightenment, and answer the question, what is enlightenment? But they have no sense of self-determination or judgment or discernment, no sense of self-reliance or conviction, which is the goal, right? Because if you don't have any of those things, then you're not going to get in the way of the machine where your labor is administered and controlled. So the goal of the education system, as Cordova shows, is to create capitalist workers, laborers, the proletariat. Um, Not a self-directed human experience, not a beautiful aesthetic religious experience, not a sacred human, a human capable of perceiving the sacredness. I think you often have to fight to become that kind of person and make drastic decisions and commitments to keep pursuing that, to pursue the sacred or God or what have you. For one, uh, respect for human sacredness instills a demand for rest that people who are too hard on themselves and are in competition with others constantly have no respect for. And insofar as they don't have respect for the rest, they don't have respect for the sacredness of the human. Sorry, I was just thinking. Um, All right, let's go back a little bit. The teacher is authoritarian. The native child's home life instills the value of self-directed behavior. From each direction comes a set of contrasting stereotypes. The white man is self-centered, greedy, acquisitive, unaware of the needs of others, unaware of the fact that he shares the world with other things, unaware of a living earth. The white man gives orders and expects others to follow them. He asks for things and for favors. Bring me that book. Would you bring me that book? Would you do this for me? He announces his feelings. I have a headache. I am thirsty. I am tired. I want this. I want you to do, and so on. The native child, on the other hand, is stereotyped by the following. He insists on socializing with his friends. He doesn't take care of his things. He lets others play with his toys. He is sneaky. He always seems to be watching everybody else. He never asks for anything. He won't do what I say. I never know what he is thinking. I know now the reasons for my weird behavior. I know also why my behavior is labeled weird. Here are the above listed behaviors with their cultural opposites. So the above listed behaviors, she means the above listed behaviors of white man. But also like the stereotypes um, are also the list of behaviors, but she explains she doesn't state them as the stereotypes. She states them as the value that's at play in those at play or at stake. Um, so self-centered contrasts with one should be aware of others, greedy and acquisitive, like wanting to acquire resources as much as possible. Um, what is the good of having anything if you can't share it? That's what it contrasted with. And then unaware of the needs of others contrasts with no one should be reduced to asking something of others, meaning that no one should have to ask for what they need. So if they need something, everybody in the community should be skilled at perceiving. And they don't maybe you don't even need to be skilled. Maybe you just need to be like a decent human being who looks at other people. But you could ask them, you could talk to them, you could get a better idea of what's going on in their lives, and then you would understand their matrix more. So there's probably this sense that you do know what's happening in your community. Unaware of other living things is contrasted with what other life forms am I disturbing? So it's this question you ask yourself. Unaware of a living earth contrasts with one ought not take the world for granted. So I'm thinking about like that tread carefully here, right? Ordering others about is contrasted with no human being has a right to order others to do one's will. Announcing one's feelings is contrasted with everybody should be able to see that I'm feeling sad, angry, etc. Direct, so like command the labor of others. Or I think maybe she means like direct in the sense of they are just doing things and they're not like kind of aware of the field or the ambience or the environment. They're not taking in extra information that they don't immediately need. And she contrasts that with I must be aware of the needs and feelings of others. I cannot broadcast my feelings or needs. It would imply that I thought the other was unaware or caring. So everybody needs to be paying attention to each other. But this constant observation, whether out of paranoia or just checking in, is seen as sneaky because I assume that they think that that constant watching is like they're looking for a chance to do something that they shouldn't be doing. Learning all of these things in the first few years of school is a daunting task for any child. Under threat of punishment or derision, the task is doubled. But it is just such incidences that call forth the awareness of the existence of competing matrices. Knowing the matrix of the demanding other would certainly facilitate the task of the indigenous child. The teacher, however, does not know why she does what she does. It is simply what one does, how one trains a child. At the root of the teacher's demands and expectations is a worldview that is based on a very specific definition or description of the world, of human beings, and of the role of human beings in that world. Will exposing the source of that worldview of the matrix make the user of a specific matrix aware of who he is? Chapter 4 and Part 2. My approach to the study of Native American philosophy is based on the idea that all cultural groups have stories that explain the origins of the world, of the nature of man, and the ways man should conduct himself in the world as it is described. Philosophical method, first and foremost, should be, in its application to comparative philosophy, a search for concepts that serve as foundational notions for other ideas and practices observed within a specific cultural group. We have, for example, the Native American concept of the relatedness of all beings, and also the concept of the earth as a mother. The questions here should be, what kind of a world would it have to be in order to justify a claim that all beings are related? What description of the world would justify referring to the earth as a mother? Attendant questions would have to involve a specific description of what it is to be human in that kind of a world. A focus should be on the interdependence of the answers to questions within a particular culture. The original answers to questions concerning the world are based on observations of the world that inquirers inhabit. An answer must have some relation to the actual existential circumstances of a people in order that the truth or validity of the explanation might convince others to agree to its explanatory strength. Following a cue from Emile Durkheim's explanation of the origin of religious belief, one might say that what first begins in the experience of human beings in a specific set of circumstances and location later becomes framed in sacred language. Once the sacred language and its accompanying rituals are set in place, it is no longer necessary to ask essential questions. The original answers become a conceptual framework that underlies all subsequent inquiry. The ancient Greeks, for example, begin with a conceptual framework built around the actions of the gods in the present course of the world. With the appearance of the philosophers known as the pre-Socratics, the questions shift from trying to decipher the actions of the gods to a more basic question. What are things really? The gods do not disappear, but the form of inquiry changes. This one was called Method, a Search for Fundamental Concepts. A similar change takes place in the Western world during the Renaissance. The conceptual framework offered the West by the Catholic Church becomes less satisfactory as people are exposed to new questions concerning the description of the world. Eventually, the explanations of the Church must make accommodations to undeniable observations that serve to explain the world to its inhabitants. Science, in this case, replaces the Church in its authority to define the world. This is not an overnight occurrence. The rediscovery of the speculations of the ancient Greeks begins its appearance in the West in the 12th century. The years allotted to the Renaissance, the rebirth of speculative inquiry, are usually given as 1350 to 1550. The discovery of the antiquity of the Earth and solar system does not take place until the 18th century, and Darwin's view does not occur until the 19th century. A conceptual framework, once in place, is not easy to eradicate or replace. It requires more than merely substituting one concept for another. A major concept underlies many more and related concepts. To change a framework is to change a society, and societies resist change. In the West today, and especially in the United States, there are still large segments of the population that deny the validity of Darwin's theory of evolution, despite its almost unanimous acceptance in the scientific community, and there are even some who deny that the Earth is more than 6,000 years old. The indigenous American, despite 500 years of concerted efforts by government, the military, and educational and religious institutions to eradicate a conceptual framework alien to the West, has managed to maintain a separate identity based on a conceptual framework that still seems to provide a better explanatory framework than that offered by the West. The philosopher's challenge is to explore those basic concepts that lend validity to the American Indian Weltanschauung, I think that's like worldview, and find their origins, their force, the difference they make in how people live in the world. But it's from phenomenology, if I'm not mistaken. But she mentioned Heidegger already. They have a different idea about that. Chapter 5 of Part 2. They have a different idea about that. The problem for the indigenous child lies not so much in his making sense of the facts that he must learn, but of making sense of the unspoken and alien context that his teacher assumes is inherent in the child. Because the new context lies unconsciously in the non-indigenous teacher's world picture, she cannot teach it to the child. She assumes he is stupid. She does not, for example, begin her teaching with such phrases as, "I will teach you that humans are superior to other beings. The world is a dead piece of matter floating in an empty universe. You are alone and in competition with each and every other individual in this classroom. There is something flawed about human beings, and we will strive to surmount those failings." None of this is said because the teacher is unaware that such ideas lie at the root of her efforts. The child may know that the context is very different from what he is used to, but he cannot articulate those differences. He assumes he is stupid. That previous paragraph, she assumes he is stupid. He assumes he is stupid. The child cannot evade the educational system. It is illegal not to go to school. He is told he is going to learn. He is not told that much of that learning consists of proselytizing or social conditioning for another form of social and cultural community than his own. If he has enlightened parents, they can assist the child in making sense of what he is taught at school. My own father prefaced most of his explanations about cultural differences with the words, "They have a different idea about that." And that was a different excerpt that they stitched together with this excerpt from her manuscripts, from Cordova's manuscripts, the editors. Specifically, well, I think it was, anyway. The Native American and the Euro-American see the world from two different perspectives. In general, the Euro-American conducts his attempts to understand his world on the assumption that there are definitive explanations to be discovered. He searches for what I call the universal absolute. There will be one universal, all-encompassing, and absolute beyond question truth. The Native American, on the other hand, understands the world as a more complex place. There can be no universals in the face of an infinity of complexity. There are no absolutes. The complexity is infinite because part of that complexity is change, motion. Whatever is in motion, and change is inevitable in the world. Motion, change, and complexity are absolutes. But they are absolutes that differ from the notion that there is one truth that can be discovered. A definition of a true statement. When I did the New Mexico, Texas Philosophical Society event, um, there was a professor there that gave a paper on Aristotle's uh, hylomorphism and mereological potentialism, um, which is kind of the idea that there's like one whole and then an infinity of infinitely complex. There's one simple whole and an infinity of infinitely complex parts. Um, but his argument was that the parts are only actually real and that at any given moment there's one whole. And the one whole has things that change, right, with infinite complexity in these parts, but they're not separate parts, not in that sense. And the example he gave that really helped me understand it was um, a block of marble can be carved into a statue of David or a statue of Michael, but it can't be carved into both of them. And at any instant, it only is precisely what it has become from the previous instant. So there's never any. So we can think that the marble has a part that could become David and a part that could become Michael, but those parts are overlapping and they physically overlapping in the same space, and they require similar but differing actions and production processes of chiseling specific ways at specific angles. Um, because Michael and David don't look the same, and the statues of them don't look the same, and they would require different, again, material processes. So anytime we might think that there are separate things because we cut the thing, well, the edge between things doesn't necessarily hold in hylomorphism. The whole is still irreducibly simple, and the parts which constitute a whole, only exist potentially and are irreducibly complex. Which is to say, the parts are only suppositions that our mind imposes upon them when we try to imagine what we might do with it. Otherwise, we don't even have that in the Western modern like Cartesian view anymore. We can't understand Aristotelian hylomorphism truly. It's probably much closer to the indigenous perspective. I'm not saying I'm not saying that the indigenous perspective can be reduced. There's a rainbow there, I think, can be reduced to hylomorphism. But I am saying that I think hylomorphism is closer to indigenous philosophy than Cartesian individualism. And so yeah, let's look at that again. There can be no universals in the face of an infinity of complexity. That's what I was thinking about, right? The infinitely complex potential parts, which are only suppositions. But I mean, that irreducibly complex, right? Irreducibly complex sensibles, which somehow do come together without being reduced to make an irreducibly simple whole that is anyway. And that move towards unity, that final whole, may be what she might still resist that, I would assume. And not she, but I'm not sure that, I don't know. I mean, that's what she says, right? The world, we come into the world, that's the whole. We're not just some separate thing from the world. We're a human being in the world, through the world. So, there are no absolutes. The complexity is infinite because part of that complexity is change, motion. Whatever is in motion, and change is inevitable in the world. Motion, change, and complexity are absolutes, but they are absolutes that differ from the notion that there is one truth that can be discovered. A definition of a true statement in the Euro-American sense implies a static state that will persist unchanging for all time. Statements of this sort are framed as all mammals are blank, or given that blank, it follows that blank. The purpose of the search for an absolute universal truth is the notion that such knowledge grants a high degree of control vested in the hands of the knower. So truth of this sort is instrumental reason. It is the ability to, it goes with that view that the world is something dangerous that must be avoided. Maybe she hasn't talked about this yet. I think she's about to talk about this. A Native American cannot make such statements. He could at most say mammals have a tendency to blank, or since we have experienced X, there is a probability that Y. Such an attitude on the part of the Native American does not lead to the view that humans, I think we're still getting good levels. There's some major background noise on the water right now in that boat going across. You probably can see it. If not now, then soon. Really lovely wake. Sharp and angular, narrow. I think the reservoir like wraps around that way quite a bit. I keep calling it a lake. It's a reservoir, lake, something. Such an attitude on the part of the Native American does not lead to the view that humans are or ever can be in a position to exercise control over the world. The goal of persons who envision themselves in a world of motion, like that boat interrupting us, right? Change and complexity is to create and work on maintaining stability in the face of all of that. The goal of the seeker for a definitive truth is to lock in something that is unchanging. The paradox of the position of the truth seeker is that change, which cannot be denied, is then viewed as a directed motion toward the goal of achieving an unchanging something. In the West, the notion of directed motion is called progress. Change is understood as a necessary marker for the arrival of, or at least approach toward, the definitive, the unchanging, the ultimate, absolute, unchanging truth. the Platonic form, which is static instead of dynamic. So this is one of the reasons I love process philosophy. This notion is best exemplified by such claims as the end of history, which is very common to talk about and hear about in philosophy, or the claim of physicist Stephen Hawking that his work will lead to knowledge of, quote, the mind of God. And Cordova has a essay called The Road to God's Mind, or The Road to the Mind of God, or The Road to God. I don't know. I mean, you could be subtle about it, right? Like, in terms of going home, there's a sacredness to going home, and it could very well be that um, in thinking about the mind of God or identifying with the mind of God or coming to that, we hope to align ourselves with a pureness of ethics or a purity of consciousness. Um, and ethics as well as an epistemology or a perspective, the perspective that allows us to see things without grief and also, but I mean, she's critical of that for some reason. No such claim could be made by a Native American. It's not critical, but I guess they're unintelligible when thinking about the sacred without a God. Um, I mean, I guess what's confusing me a little bit is that I feel like the world is relational, and I feel like it's dynamic and it changes in response to me, and it's a very personal world. Um, and it feels like God, but I don't think that God is an extraterrestrial being who is orchestrating the world in that fashion. But I respect and appreciate the sacredness of the world as given to me, as this thing engaging and play with me. So the goal of the Native American, deriving from a different set of assumptions altogether, is to create an island of stable motion in a sea of random but predictable motion. An example of random but predictable motion would be the pattern of wood grain. There is always such a pattern, the predictable, but what that pattern will be is dependent on numerous, incalculable factors. This is the random element. Stability for the Native American, unlike its connotation for the Western thinker, is not synonymous with a static, unchanging state. Stability requires action for its maintenance. Stability denotes, for the Native American, a balancing act. John Dewey thinks that the aesthetic experience and survival and harmony with one's environment all involve this interrelation of differing needs and harmonies, and he critiques the silos of the academy and of the institutions of common public life um, for having too much separation, silos, right? And that's not, that static definition and categorization is not um, organization. He doesn't use the word stability so much as organization. In his writing, stability is contrasted with, uh, he does identify, I think, stability as opposed to, what was the word? It's not volatility. Uh, Winchester, the shade keeps moving because the sun keeps coming overhead, directly overhead. Um, anyway, is not denotes for a balancing act. Okay, stability denotes for the Native American a balancing act. But there cannot be only one type of balancing act in a universe exhibiting numerous motions. There will be numerous and diverse balancing acts. There cannot be one all-encompassing truth or true way of doing or defining anything in the face of the diversity and complexity exhibited by the universe. Do you guys see that bird? Instead of truth, there will be truths. Instead of capital T truth, there will be lowercase truths. There will be perspectives, each dependent upon and relative to one's circumstances in the world. Each perspective in its own environment or circumstances will be true or valid in that environment in those circumstances. He does not assume that the person from a different space will share his notions. He does not assume the incorrectness of the other's perspective when it does not coincide with his own. Thus, a Native American confronts a problem when speaking to or writing for a non-Native American audience. The Native American, in any form of communication with someone outside his own group, Cheyenne, Cree, Pueblo, European, etc., assumes that he is speaking from one very specific perspective and that he is addressing another coming from a very different perspective. He does not assume what the Westerner calls objectivity, that is, that there is a neutral ground upon which all perspectives cease to count. The Native American is speaking as subject to other subjects. His observations are subjective. The subjective, however, has a very different meaning in this context than it does for the Western speaker. Subjectivity in the West carries the implication of a highly personal and most likely unshared perspective. The different concepts of subjectivity rest on two very different notions, different definitions of what it is to be an individual. In the West, the individual is assumed to be a subject of his own making, right? An actually discrete part from other parts of the whole. He assumes that there is a world, quote unquote, outside of his own making. His views, his values, his perspectives are things that he has come to of his own accord. He assumes that there is a world outside that which he makes for himself so that he can make such statements as, let's leave ourselves outside of this for just a moment. The Native American assumes something quite different. His views, his values, his perspectives are shared notions. He shares these with the members of his family, his group. He speaks in the terms of we and not I. The we of the Native American, as in we believe or say this about that, would perhaps be more correctly defined as the intrasubjective. That is, there are qualities that I share with others of my own kind, views, values, etc., and do not share with others unlike us. The Native American, just as the Euro-American, can make the distinction between what he personally believes, thinks, feels, knows, and what he shares with his fellows. But he recognizes that much of what he believes, knows, and so on is colored by who and what he is. The Euro-American does not acknowledge that he has an inherited worldview. An awareness of an inherited worldview is not necessary as long as all of one's communication remains within a very narrow circle of one's like-minded fellows. The recognition of the rightful existence of the other is based on the metaphysical notion that the world consists of very different places and circumstances. Each place, each circumstance, contains within itself that which is accommodated to the specific place or circumstance. There is no assumption here that all humans are alike, or that some such general notion as mankind can be used to apply to the human species, except in a very superficial sense. The general term cats, for instance, can be used to say something very general about a particular species, but to carry to any further extent the statements that can be made on such terms is rather difficult given that there are jaguars, lions, lynx, tigers, and domestic cats. To the Native American, the fact that lions and tigers and jaguars exist is equivalent to there being Europeans, Chinese, Navajo, and Anishinaabe, or Anishinaabe, no, Anishinaabe. Um, Real knowledge consists of a recognition of the existence of classes and not merely the recognition of the existence of species. So I I think you could ask yourself, how do we expect difference and start from that point without assuming things about the other person? Like, how do we, because it can almost sound like she's racializing things, like Chinese are a certain way, Europeans are a certain way, Navajo are a certain way. And I think what we can do instead is just acknowledge that everybody should be articulating where they're coming from more consistently and assuming that they're understood less often. Um, And when we start, we always start from this point of expecting difference. Then we're expecting an openness and expecting to build a bridge. We're not assuming that we know what's on the other side of the river and never have to build a bridge to begin with. Racialization and stereotyping and racism and sexism and all of these things, they never cross the bridge to see the other side at all. They never world travel. They never explain their notions so that they can ask the questions necessary to understand the other's notions, which is how you would world travel or cross the bridge, unless you're violently forced to, which minorities are, as Cordova and Lugones and Enzaldua all make clear to us. I think Hook's probably too. But anyway, let's go back to this thinking about difference existing without it being an attributable difference. So we're thinking, I guess we call it like non-attributable difference. To the Native American, the fact that lions and tigers and jaguars exist is equivalent to their being Europeans, Chinese, Navajo, and Anishinaabe. No, and you could think it just there's cultural differences, right? Cultural to say that there are cultural differences and to expect cultural differences without imposing too drastic of cultural of expectations of cultural difference, because you can have benevolent racism and obviously like hateful racism, and then benevolent sexism is when women are coddled or given, I guess, extra privilege, but they're not allowed to make their own determinations, and so in that sense, they're still limited. Anyway, real knowledge consists of recognition of the existence of classes and not merely the recognition of the existence of species. So that's the word she wants us to use instead of race, is class, a class of people that live a certain way. And it may be site-based or it may be a little bit more scattered and diasporic. I may not find my community in the community I was raised in, but I may find lots of people like me, as Lugona says, on the road traveling, because people like me are only ever on the road these days. That's what Lugona says. Totally, I'm not sure.